We're going to get some help here. Daniel Castro joins us live from Atlanta. He's a senior analyst with the Information Technology and Innovation Foundation. Jim Spellman stays with us here at the anchor desk. Daniel, let me ask you this. For all of us around the world that are watching, we're not naive. We know spying happens from every single country against a lot of people outside of the country. This is a little bit different because this is about gathering information about people not just outside the U.S., but also inside the U.S. How big of a deal do you think this really is?
That's right. I mean, the concern that so many people have is that what the NSA has been doing is they've been collecting data on everyone indiscriminately without regards to whether they're in the United States or outside the United States, whether they're a U.S. citizen or not a U.S. citizen, and that there are not really solid protections in place, and that maybe even some of those benefits that we're trying to get haven't been realized. That everyone wants national security, they want to be protected by the government, but we need to make sure those benefits actually occur. Otherwise, why are we having this trade-off?
Daniel, Jim Spellman here in Washington. Just a couple of days ago, a court case here in Washington found that a lot of these programs are potentially unconstitutional. How will that affect that court case, and a few other court cases are making way through the courts? How will that affect these recommendations when the White House is deciding what to implement and what to not implement?
Well, I think they're certainly going to be looking at how they can use these recommendations to create a program that different sides can live with. I mean, the reality is most of these recommendations are things that the NSA should have done from the very beginning. These aren't radical reforms to the program. These are kind of insider reforms to an existing program. So I think what the White House will likely do is try to implement many of these programs, many of these recommendations quickly, so that concerns about the program in some ways will be moot. They will have already changed, and they'll have a new program that they'll have to look at.
I'm torn by all of this because I believe in privacy, of course, and data security and all the above. But at the same time, one of the arguments that some of the critics are making here is that, look, you need to have this. This provides a safety net for the United States against terrorism. I mean, this is part of the whole deal after 9/11 that we decided to kind of open things up a little bit more and allow for a bit more intrusion of privacy. What would you tell those critics that say that by changing this rule, changing these laws, and changing what the NSA does, it actually creates a higher risk of terrorism in the United States?
Well, there's many responses to that. I mean, one is that if you have a security and a surveillance regime such that everyone's afraid to use U.S. technology, use Google and Facebook and any other communication and IT device that's made in the United States, there will be no surveillance capabilities because no one will be on it, that just simply doesn't function. The long-term view is we have to consider not only just pure national security interests, but also our economic interests. And U.S. companies cannot compete internationally if people don't trust our companies.
Daniel, one of the things that's in this review, it says the U.S. should take into account the diplomatic fallout of what happens if they're spying essentially on foreign leaders like we saw with Angela Merkel, showing that there's diplomatic political fallout that has to be balanced against the intelligence benefit. How do they come up with that equation?
Well, it seemed like the assumption by the NSA was that they would never make a mistake, and clearly that wasn't a very good assumption. I think going forward, I mean, the policy analysis needs to look at the decisions they're making and look at the implications of it becoming public. And that's one reason why transparency is actually kind of a benefit for everyone. Because if people know that these things are happening, then we wouldn't have such negative fallout when they do occur. And if we're all playing by the same rules in the United States, in Germany, in France, in the UK, in Brazil, then there's more agreement about these are the rules of the road, this is what surveillance agencies can do, and these are what they can't do.
The court decision talks about the Fourth Amendment, which is sort of the right, and you have the privacy. The government can't just go into a house and take the information. In this case, it could be your cell phone or your laptop. But I wanted to ask you, what's wrong with the government collecting data about you and I as long as our names aren't being attached to it? I mean, they would argue, and I think they have in the past, that this is sort of a macro data collection. We're not singling anybody out.
Yeah, I mean, so that's exactly what some of these programs were doing. It was metadata, so it was the communication patterns overall, and they wanted to learn something from the relationships that you have between people and extract new information from that. What we found is that so far they haven't been able to really point to any great example of where that's been a success. But we should take that with a grain of salt, because a lot of these tools and analyses, this is really cutting edge. I mean, these are people that are really researching how we can use data to extract new knowledge from it. And we don't know how to do that really well yet, but that doesn't mean we won't be able to do that in the future. So as the president and his officials review these recommendations, they're going to have to consider not only what has been successful to date, but what the potential is for this technology in the future.
Daniel, bottom line here, what are the White House, what of these recommendations will they really be able to enact?
Well, I think the single most important recommendation here that they can move on is to change the U.S. policy so that right now the NSA has been working against the general cybersecurity interest of the rest of the country, of the private sector, and even of the federal government. They've been introducing back holes, they've been weakening encryption standards. That policy has to change. That's something that I think there's going to be unanimous agreement on, that there's no need to weaken security for everyone just so one agency can have better intelligence.
Daniel Castro, live for us from Atlanta with the Information Technology and Innovation Foundation. Thank you, and of course our own Jim Spellman, thank you very much. A very